Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for 3 o'clock with SOC. Today is the day after the election, and we have a special edition of our community forum for you. Give me a second while I make sure that our Spanish-speaking residents have access to this program in Spanish. Buenas tardes. Gracias por estar con nosotros hoy a las 3 con SAC. Hoy es el día después de las elecciones y tenemos un foro especial para reflejar en ayer. Si ustedes quieren acceso al programa en español, por favor marquen el número que está en la pantalla, que es el 425-436-6200. Cuando contestan la llamada, por favor, compartan la contraseña que aparece empezando con el número 6, que es 627-682. As I said earlier, this is a special edition of 3 o'clock with SOC, reflecting on yesterday's election. My name is Tammy Rivera. I'm the Executive Director and Lead Organizer for Southside Organizing Center. Today, we have a special format. We are going to highlight some resources from SOC's regular program of housing support, housing resources. So in a little bit, we'll have one of our staffers on, our veteran staff, Clarissa Morales, and she's gonna share some information and resources for those of you needing housing assistance. After that, we have some very special folks in our community who are going to discuss with us. Gladys there, we're not quite ready for her, but she'll wait for us. And then we're going to have a special a list of guests with us for today's show. Today's show is called The Why to Yesterday's Election. And what we're going to do with our guests is talk about the systems, the processes, and the people which held the election yesterday, despite the coronavirus risk and despite the safer at home order from the governor. And the guests that we have with you today are Ed Folón, a Marquette University law professor, Pedro Colon, currently a circuit court judge, but also previously a state representative for, I believe, more than a decade. And he was also our first Latino IX elected person in Wisconsin, the first Wisconsin Latino IX elected in our state. And so we're gonna start with Clarissa. Now we can bring her on. And let me tell you a little bit about Clarissa. Clarissa, as I shared, is our veteran staff. She's been with the agency 6 years. She has a long history of social work in our community. She's done some incredible work, and she's been a faithful soldier at SOC, reaching out to residents and helping us establish resident associations. She is our community organizer for the southern portion of our district. Our district is from First Street to Miller Parkway, from the Valley to Oklahoma, and she has the whole southern border. And then in addition to that, she coordinates our bilingual services. For those of you who don't know, we have a department where you can get interpretation in Spanish simultaneously. We have translation in Spanish services for documents you need translated, and we have equipment we rent out. We have enough equipment for up to 4 languages. Claudia, or is it 6? 4? 4 languages to be transmitted at the same time simultaneously to up to 60 total headsets, so that you can have your events happen and reduce the event time by having the interpretation done simultaneously by the headphones. But today we're going to be talking about her third responsibility, which is public resources, and we're going to be focusing on housing. Glady, there are a lot of questions now because so many offices are physically closed that provide services to the community, and the service to public service to our community, is less now because people are focusing on critical needs. Tell us how people can respond to the critical needs of housing repairs. Tell us the people you've talked to and the resources you've gathered to share today regarding critical housing needs. And then after that, we'll talk about eviction.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I am Clarissa Morales, and I have been speaking with a lot of different nonprofit agencies here in Milwaukee regarding uh, services that residents are in critical need of during this pandemic. And one of the things that have kept coming up are busted pipes and roof leaks. Being that we're on this stay-at-home order, these services are still being provided. Revitalize Milwaukee is really taking a lead with helping these residents get these services, especially our elderly population who aren't internet savvy, who are still having landlines to be able to do their communications. And they also are really just out there on the front lines trying to make sure that we're all being taken care of during this crisis. Revitalize Milwaukee's phone number is 414-312-7531. If you have a critical repair that needs to be done, if your roof is leaking, if you have a sewer backup, if you're having other kind of issues that cannot wait until after we can get out, please give them a call. Also, 211. You can dial 211 from your cell phone, but if it doesn't go through as 211, you can dial their phone number of 414-773-0211. They will also be able to help you with any kind of housing issues you're having regarding not having anywhere to go during this pandemic. We are doing our best to make sure that everybody is staying informed during these trying times. If also there are other repairs or issues that you may have that you feel is a critical 911 dire emergency, Community Advocates is also another great resource. They have live advocates that you can speak to. And they are on a daily basis, they're open. So I would strongly, suggest reaching out to them if you're having issues regarding home repair and also housing issues. Another service that is still being offered, and then that's through the Neighborhood Improvement Development Corp, NIDC, through the city of Milwaukee. They have what is called a targeted investment neighborhood, and that neighborhood is the Walker's Point neighborhood. We have been working with that for 2 years now, and if residents are still in need of repairs that are not critical repairs, they can still apply for the TIN loan program. And if you are outside of that TIN and are still in need of repairs, you can contact them as well for what is called the Strong Homes Loan Program. These are partially forgivable loans that are being offered to residents in the city of Milwaukee for up to $20,000.
They have critical housing needs, and we have resources for the community to go if they have questions or concerns about evictions, correct?
Yes, that would be through the Community Advocates. They have the advocates online. They have live advocates, and that number is 414-270-4646.
the city shared with you about what's considered to be sort of critical housing needs at this point.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, can you share what you said Ben shared with you this morning about what are some of the things that are considered a critical housing need?
Well, that was through Revitalize Milwaukee, and the critical housing needs were roof repairs and sewer backups or busted pipes.
Great.
And
Thank you.
also,
Oh, go ahead.
one more, if they have furnace issues, if their furnaces go out, they can also contact Revitalize Milwaukee regarding that. And the Energy Assistance Program is still available to help them with those critical repairs. Because even though it's April, we know Wisconsin and we could have snow tomorrow. So
Well,
we need
thank you.
heat.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll have you back talking about the other programs that we have. For those of you who need some more information or would like to hear that again, it should appear on our Facebook Live comments, and you should be able to catch up with those resources shared there. And you can always call SOC's office. SOC is here for you. We haven't stopped serving you since all of this started. We didn't miss a day. All our staff is virtual. They've been equipped, trained, and supported to be there for you in all the ways we usually are, except for we can't see you in person quite yet. So you can call SOC at 414-672-8090, and Clarissa answers those calls. And we have our other staff reviewing emails, Instagram, our regular Facebook, this comment thread, also our LinkedIn. And so I just want to take a couple of seconds to say hello to some of our participants, some of our faithful residents. Hola, Lely Ramos from the Spanish Journal. Hola, Felix Gestel. Good to see you here with us, brother. I want to share a disclaimer before we start the program. The views and opinions shared in this program may not necessarily be those held by SOC, just to be transparent and clear with you all. And so what we're going to do now is start our special edition of the program. And before I do that, I want to invite you to come back tomorrow, 3 o'clock with SOC. Today, we're going to be, because tomorrow we have a special edition as well. Today, our critical topic is, why did the elections take place yesterday? The systems, processes, and people which held the election despite the coronavirus risk and despite the governor's safer at home order. And today we're approaching this topic from a legal perspective, and I'll introduce the guest in just a second. Tomorrow, I want to invite you to be with us, because tomorrow we're going to take on this topic from a grassroots organizing, social justice movement, farm worker rights perspective. And we're going to have our veteran elder organizers with us, including Dr. Tony Baez. And I'll announce the other guests as soon as I have confirmation from them. But you want to tune in tomorrow to hear that perspective. So I'd like to introduce to you our guest today. Today we have some wonderful human beings outside of the role that they play in the community, and some subject matter experts. What we have today, as I shared, was a legal perspective. So we have Ed Falone with us, Marquette University law professor, and if you know him, someone we have depended on for constitutional civil rights clarification for us. And we have Molly Collins, who is the director of advocacy for the ACLU. And so we'll have them on with us now. Johnny, if you could get them on for us. And a little later in the show, we have Judge Pedro Colon joining us. And he is a Milwaukee County Circuit Court judge. He is a former state rep. He was serving us for a little more than a decade. And he was our first Latino AX elected elected Latino AX in the state of Wisconsin. And so we're gonna get those guests on with us in just a second. I'm gonna do some troubleshooting here, so please be patient with me. I'm gonna just communicate with our production crew to help facilitate this. Johnny, we have Molly and Ed who checked in with us here. You can see in the chat that they shared that they're here with us. If you can bring them on with us, that would be great. And Molly and Ed, if you can hear me, if you can check in on the chat again, then we could confirm that you're here, and we can expect that Glady got off of the software, correct? Our guests are refreshing. So we've had a little trouble with this new software that allows us to get on Facebook, and we're hoping we can make this all work in just a second for you. What I'd like to do now while we're waiting for them is, why don't you all share the questions that you have regarding the election yesterday? Can you all ask some questions there, and we'll start collecting those while we get our guests on with us. Let's see, let me review some of the comments here. Felix saying it shouldn't have taken place. Lily saying she's waiting patiently. Yeah, we gathered some questions yesterday. That's why we took the topic on today. People were saying, why are the elections being held? People are being forced to choose between their physical health and life, potentially, and with their voting rights, which have impacts on their physical health, right, and life. And so that's what led us to make this special edition show. And all of the activities that we shared yesterday, when we said, okay, the US Supreme Court said that they will extend the amount of time that they will allow absentee ballots to arrive, because usually you have to get your absentee ballot in, and then with enough time so that it gets there by the election. But the US Supreme Court, right, when we talk about, and our guests can correct me if I say anything wrong, but when we talk about the highest authority in the land, for us, it's the US Supreme Court. So they gave us until we had to get our absentee ballots in by yesterday, the day of the election, which I did myself. I took mine and my son's to the post office first thing in the morning to make sure that they were postmarked. But now it gave the opportunity for that to be counted by the 13th. So that was the US Supreme Court. And then if you were following it, then the governor said, let's postpone the election till June 9th. However, the legislature said they were not, some of the leadership of the legislature said that they were not going to allow that. And then the Wisconsin Supreme Court, not the US that I just talked about, but the Wisconsin Supreme Court, excuse me, said that they were going to have the election still occur. And so I don't know about you all, but I swim in this all the time, and I was confused about who had authority, whose authority trumped whose authority, and what other measures could be taken to keep people safe. Some of the questions that arose were, well, why hasn't this been thought about previously? Because surely we've had other occasions in our nation's history that when there were natural disasters and people couldn't vote. What happened then? The other questions, why couldn't it have been postponed if there were such detrimental impacts about postponing the election? Why weren't people saying we can't postpone it because? Other questions, why was Madison able to have 60 some polling sites and Milwaukee only had 5? Why was one of those polling sites in the core area of the coronavirus impact, like the growth? So those are the kinds of questions like we want to tackle today. What are the systems? What is the process for examining these kinds of issues, and who are the players and who has authority to? The other question that arose yesterday was, given the statement by the Supreme Court, couldn't the health department have said, welcome back. We had a lot of problem solving to do. I apologize. It looks like we got kicked out by Facebook. I don't know about you conspiracy theorists, but we're going to have this discussion on Facebook or somewhere else. So I'd like Johnny to bring on our guests. Again, Ed Falone, law professor at Marquette University, and Molly Collins, advocacy director for the ACLU. Welcome, Molly.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being patient in this digital world.
It's a new world we're all living in.
Yeah, let's see if Johnny can bring on Ed at the same time so we can jump into the discussion. I know Ed has to leave by 4, so hopefully he can join us. While we're bringing Johnny on, the question to why the elections were held despite the coronavirus threat and despite the governor's safer at home order. Can you give us a sense from your perspective of things people need to know about the systems or the processes or the people and authorities involved?
I mean, I think that the governor had a few weeks to act on this, and he really waited until the last minute. I can't really speak to what his rationale for that was. Perhaps he was worried about the legislature intervening in the way that they did. But when he did make the order to suspend the election, it was Monday. It was 2 days ago only, and the legislature immediately moved to intervene and sued to keep the election moving forward. And so we know that that is, a continued pattern of the legislature in Wisconsin being willing to disenfranchise people, particularly people of color, low-income people, and people with disabilities who were disproportionately impacted by this action. So, I mean, I think the governor might have been waiting for some of the other court cases to sort of proceed and see what he had to do, but I think maybe he should have taken stronger steps initially in the process. I think Professor Falone was going to speak to some of the court cases, but I can try to speak to that as well. The city of Green Bay was the first court or the first case to file, I believe, and they basically were saying, like, we can't safely hold this election, and so they their case wanted to suspend the in-person election entirely, and they their case was thrown out by the court because for a standing reason, the court basically said you don't have the authority to bring this lawsuit. The Democrats and then there were 3 separate cases filed. The Democrats filed a lawsuit. Several nonpartisan organizations like the League of Women Voters and Black Leaders Organizing Communities and other groups filed lawsuits also to postpone the election. That's a tough call for groups to make, but I think everybody was looking at what the right choice for public health was. And I think that the right choice for public health would have been to not move forward with yesterday's election and postpone it until we could either make sure that everybody was able to vote by absentee ballot, because we know that from in-person same day registration numbers in Milwaukee, that more African American and Latino voters would be impacted by the decision to just go to an all-male election or a male-only election without giving people the option to register in person or to troubleshoot problems that folks had, even sort of digital divide questions, and that people don't have, not everybody could request an absentee ballot. Yeah, I think Ed is ready to come on now, maybe. Can we hear you?
Ed Falone on via voice. All right. Can we hear Molly talk, and can we hear Ed Falone talk? If everybody's mics can be on. Johnny. Quite a challenge for us today. We're going to keep trying to get Ed on. And in the meantime, Molly, we'll manage him, and we'll let you share your expertise with us.
Okay.
It's hard. It's so distracting.
Yeah, I'm trying to watch what's happening also. I think there were some interesting reports from today. Yesterday, I was in the field with Wisconsin Election Protection, which is a group of nonpartisan observers from a lot of different organizations, including the League of Women Voters, the American Civil Liberties Union, the AFL. A lot of different groups come together to monitor the poll situation. And I could tell from being in 4 of the 5 Milwaukee polls yesterday that the turnout was really low. Despite 3-hour-long lines at several of the polling locations, specifically at Washington High School and Riverside High School, it just felt like there weren't enough people there. And based on the fact that we only had 5 of 180 polling locations to visit. There's some reporting by Nathaniel, I think, Rakish, a journalist at 538. And he said that the city of Milwaukee reported that 18,000 people voted in person yesterday, almost 19,000. And so far, we've gotten about 56,000 ballots back. And there are about 40,000 ballots that have not yet been returned, but the city thinks that were mailed to people. So even if all of those ballots come in, that's approximately 115,000 voters. And by contrast, in 2016, about 167,000 people voted. So we know that 50,000 people, about a third of Milwaukee voters, were disfranchised yesterday, and maybe as many as 90,000 if we don't get those outstanding ballots back. And Wisconsin Election Protection and other groups logged hundreds of incidents from voters who encountered problems, from folks who didn't receive the absentee ballots they requested, or they got an empty envelope or a wrong ballot. Today we're hearing reports that piles of ballots have been discovered in an Appleton post office that were never mailed to voters, that maybe Fox Point never mailed their ballots. So we're hearing all of these issues in addition to the extremely long lines, confusion about the polling places and where folks had to go, confusion about whether or not you needed a witness to sign your ballot envelope that you returned. I think as a result of all of those things, we believe that African American and Latino participation was definitely lower than normal. And voters should never have been forced to choose between their health and safety and their ability to participate in the election in the first place. There isn't ward data reported yet, so there isn't a solid analysis of the voting data, but we do know that African Americans made up half of the COVID cases in Milwaukee County and about 80% of the deaths. So we're placing an extra burden on those folks to risk going to an in-person polling place.
Let's see if we can bring Ed Falone in now. Ed,
Great.
are you able to jump in? We'll give it a second to see if we can tune him in. We're not hearing Ed. Let me ask you, we'll keep working on that. Let me ask you some of the questions that were on people's minds now for these last couple of minutes. One is there any room for the health department? Was there any room for the health department at whatever municipal, state, federal to say, this is a public health hazard and we are not allowing polls to be open, or we're closing polls? Is there any space there for that action to have been taken?
So I'm not an attorney, but I can tell you that a number of attorneys and other folks were researching that very question. I think the consensus was that there was room for the Secretary Designee of Health, Secretary Palm, to have taken some action and have it remain in force. I think that there's a political analysis. The Secretary hadn't been confirmed by the Senate, and so it would have been very easy for them to remove her. If she did take that action, it might have still been the right thing to do. And I think that that question will remain in 2 weeks if we see the numbers spike as a result of having an in-person election, if there is a man-made disaster in Milwaukee County.
And then what about the question about, do you have any information on why Madison was able to have so many polls open, 66 versus Milwaukee? Had you heard anything about that question that's being asked?
I don't really know the answer to that. I think that all of the poll workers that I observed in Milwaukee were working really hard to make sure people could cast their ballots. They were being very careful. They were cleaning all of the booths between folks. They were encouraging people to bring their own pens from home and not touch any more things in a polling place than they need to. Folks were really trying very hard, and I don't want to second guess their real efforts to keep people safe. I do think that, like, we should have figured out how to do it a little differently, because I'm sure that those long lines disenfranchised folks.
And so what about, oh, now there's a terrible echo. Not sure what that's about. What about, and of course, like, we so appreciate all of the people who are staying on the front line with the elections, groceries, first responders, hospital personnel. So this is in no reflection to them, because what we're really talking about is systems and processes and people of authority. Could the National Guard have been used to staff polling places? Like, is there a precedent for that? Do you know if that was a possibility?
they-
Because
They were there yesterday at several of the polling places, but my understanding of what happened with them was they were asked to sort of volunteer and to do it outside of their normal duties. They weren't required to do it. I think like perhaps it's a weird position to say we should have the National Guard running our elections, but I feel like if we had to go forward with the in-person election, maybe mobilizing them to keep more polling places open might have been a good option.
the other question that arose was, are there laws? Now, they said the election had to be held, but are there laws in place that say you have to inform people with so much lead time about a poll change, like a poll location change or any election change? Like, that's another area to explore. The Supreme Court said, no, you had to hold it today because, or yesterday because apparently something about the governor didn't give enough time for them to consider, the legislature to respond, or whatever happened there. But I'm wondering, well, there have to be some considerations for notification, sufficient notification.
I don't know if there is a law that says that, but certainly best practices would say that residents of the city of Milwaukee should have more notice than the Friday before the Tuesday election, that we were only going to have 5 polling places, and organizations who work with folks to get them to the polls and to make sure that they know about what their rights are when they're there. Those organizations should have had more time to talk to their voters and say like, hey, y'all, your polling places changed, because I know I witnessed several people be disfranchised. At the end of the night last night, I was in Washington High School. I was observing folks, folks who were in line by 8 o'clock should be able to vote. And we saw someone who came in, she had gotten in line around 6 o'clock. She was voting at around 8 o'clock or 8:30, and she got to the very front of the line and they told her she was supposed to be at Riverside. And she had waited 2.5 hours and was so frustrated and completely understandably that she waited 2.5 hours and then was not able to vote. And that is so frustrating and sad, and that should never happen.
Yeah, I agree. And so those are other questions that we have to find out yet, the laws about sufficient notice, notification, and also the type of notification. Just because a Supreme Court announces something doesn't mean every resident hears it. And so what are the obligations of the government to notify people? So did everybody have to have a paper notification who's a registered voter instead of a press conference, assuming everybody has that? And then the other question people are asking, why couldn't they have just sent an absentee ballot to every single voter in Wisconsin and handled that way? Do you have any information on that?
Well, I think there's 2 important considerations there. One is if they did mail an absentee ballot to everyone who was registered, anyone who wasn't registered, which is, thousands and thousands of people who are eligible to vote, who probably want to vote or might want to vote, but maybe moved and no longer live at the address that they had resided during the last election, all of those folks would have been disenfranchised. And so I don't think an all-mail election with no forethought about how do we make sure that folks who move, that people we know in lower income classifications are more mobile, that we don't accidentally disfranchise all of those people by just all of a sudden saying like, well, you only get to vote in Wisconsin if you were registered before today. And that's just not fair. So I don't think like a hasty all mail election was the right answer there. I think that the other weird logistical question is like the election commission didn't have that many ballots printed. They don't actually expect that every registered voter will vote in every election. And so it becomes more challenging. Just they weren't ready for that sort of question.
Got you. Well, then that begs the question, right? Can't you just automatically register people, which has been a long time debate that we can address. What we're going to try to do is figure out our technical difficulties and make sure we can get Ed Falone back. Pedro Colon is trying to get on the line, and we certainly have a lot of questions to be answered. So I want to share them with you so you can share them with your colleagues at ACLU, and we want to share them with the public again. And help me if I miss any of them. The questions, we still have answers, so we just began this exploration of the why the elections were held despite the risk to the coronavirus and despite the governor's safer at home order. Is one, did the health department have any authority in which they could have exercised to say, this is a public hazard, we can't allow, we're going to close all public facilities, including poll places? The other question is, why was Madison able to have 66 polls open and us only 5? Another question is, are there laws, due notification that require a certain amount of sufficient notification to residents about voting changes and what those notification vehicles are required to do? I'm just thinking, if you can find us for your taxes, you can find us for saving lives. The question about, was there a way to avoid having a polling place in the epicenter of the spread? Other question, could the National Guard have been used in this case if the voting was going to happen? Although there's pros and cons to that too. That doesn't help people feel safe when you have a bunch of militant presence. Why couldn't the ballots have been at least mailed to everyone? And even if they didn't have a supply of them, I mean, printing is the least of our worries. I mean, we have a bunch of people who are out of business right now who could have printed ballots for the state of Wisconsin. A long time question is, why even make people register? Why can't we automatically have people registered to vote? And so if I missed anything, maybe our public, let's see if the public has any questions to add. What happens with the folks who requested absentee ballots within the time frame and didn't receive them? What happened to the folks who received the absentee ballot, saw that the court ruled they could have that they didn't need a witness, but then the witness requirement came back? Do they get grace because they did theirs within the window of the authority telling them that they could send them in without a witness signature with a statement saying they didn't have one? See if there's any other questions. Yes, thank you to the poll workers. That was a huge sacrifice. And a high risk. We shouldn't have put them in that position either. So these are the questions we began this journey today. Molly, thank you for being with us. Ed, our sincerest apologies. Thank you for all the attempts. Pedro Colon also attempted to be on. And so as we grow in our ability to do grassroots organizing digitally, we're going to figure this out, folks. We might have to change to a different venue online, but we are grateful to you, Molly, and to the ACLU for being great partners with the community and sharing the information, and we hope to have you back with us. Now, for the rest of the folks, our plan is to have the grassroots organizing veterans, our elders, weigh in on these issues tomorrow. We might be using a different platform to reach you. The one we're using right now is not serving our purposes well. We'll try to figure that out tonight. If not, we will try this again tomorrow in this same software that we're using. What I'd like to do now is just make a couple of announcements in these last couple of minutes that we have. We're so grateful for our guests today and for you all staying with us during this technical difficulties with the software we're trying to use. We do have some positive news. This was a heavy segment, a necessary segment, a discussion for us to have as a community. But we have the winner of yesterday's drawing. That winner is Alicia Escamilla. Alicia Escamilla, if you know her, let her know. She won a gift certificate of $25 to a local restaurant or business that supports SOC, or a local Southside business who has done, well, we can open it wider than that, has done good deeds during this heavy time, has gone above and beyond to help the community. If you'd like to nominate some restaurants or businesses who have done so, please put that in our comments. Again, we want to thank you. We want to remind you tomorrow, 3 o'clock with SOC for another special edition of our community forum on Facebook Live. And with our Dr. Tony Baez will be joining us to give his perspective from the civil rights perspective on yesterday's election. Thank you. Be safe, and we will see you here tomorrow at 3 o'clock.